welcome to History Club for January, and this month we are celebrating Chinese New Year. And here to help us celebrate is our special guest, Tom Martineau. Mr. Martineau, will you please tell everyone a little bit about yourself and your background?
Thank you, Jordan, and Xin Nian Kuai Le. Happy New Year in Chinese. So my name is Tom Martineau. I'm with an organization called Global NC, and we're based in Raleigh, North Carolina, Durham, Raleigh, North Carolina. We're an international education center, and I'm the director of China programs there. My work involves supporting schools that teach Chinese language throughout the state of North Carolina. And my own background in China, I first went to China in 1995, and I was a Peace Corps volunteer teaching English. I lived in China from 1995 to 2002. I lived in the province of Sichuan, which is in the southwest of China, and in my last 2 years I was in Beijing. So I've been in North Carolina since 2002, but my work has had me going back to China pretty much on an average every year or so. That's my personal background.
All right, great. So now that we know a little bit about you, could you give us an overview of Chinese New Year and how it's celebrated?
Sure. We are fast approaching the Year of the Tiger, which will be February 1st this year. But Chinese New Year is based on the lunar calendar, so the dates change from year to year. It's generally between January 20th and February 20th on the Gregorian calendar. So Chinese New Year is also referred to as Spring Festival in mainland China. It is celebrated on the first year. It commemorates the first day of the first month of the year, but celebrations start a little before New Year's Eve, and they last all the way 2 weeks after New Year's Day to the Lantern Festival. So it's something that is the most important celebration to the Chinese people, not just in China, but throughout the world. And it is really kind of a combination, I would say, of, if you look at our holidays, of Thanksgiving and then Christmas and New Year's Day, it's kind of wrapped up all in one.
So all rolled together.
Yes.
Well, you had mentioned that for Chinese New Year, it's not just celebrated in China, but it's celebrated throughout the world. Could you talk a little bit about how it's celebrated in other countries, how it might be celebrated in the U.S., say?
Sure. I mean, really, China is a very international country. Chinese have, work and study in pretty much all countries throughout the world. So usually Chinese, whether they're, been in a country for many years, or they're scholars or working in a country, they like to commemorate Chinese New Year. North Carolina is no exception. Chapel Hill, Raleigh, there's often Chinese New Year celebrations that are organized by Chinese organizations. So there'll be galas, performances, with singing, dancing, what have you. And of course, families themselves, no matter where they're living in the world, it's about gathering together as best you can with family and friends. And food is a very big part of the tradition as well. China has also influenced other countries. For example, Mongolia, Vietnam, Korea, they all have New Year's celebrations very similar to the Chinese New Year celebration as well. So pretty much anywhere you go in the world, you can find a place where they're celebrating Chinese New Year this time of year.
Yes, and I understand that the largest celebration outside of China itself takes place in San Francisco.
Yes. I will hedge my bet and say that's probably true, but I'm sure there are other celebrations too, places like Singapore that might rival San Francisco, but probably certainly in the U.S. I bet you San Francisco would be number one.
All right, so let's go into some of the ways it's celebrated.
Mm-hmm.
For example, I featured the color red here prominently because I understand that's a very important color in Chinese culture and to Chinese New Year celebrations. So could you explain a little bit about the background of how that tradition got started and what the color red significance to Chinese culture is?
Well, red, China traditionally has 5 elements. So metal, fire, water, earth, and wood are the 5 elements in Chinese. And red is associated with fire, one of the primal elements in Chinese tradition. So red has come to symbolize beauty, it's come to symbolize happiness, and any festival in China, you'll see the color red feature quite prominently. So red with Chinese New Year, you'll see it in the different sorts of decorations. I noticed you have red envelopes,
Right.
which are part of the tradition.
We have a picture of them right here.
So you'll see different New Year's greetings here on these red backgrounds, red and gold. One in particular, Fu, the character Fu, you'll often see that on different doors throughout China. It's the character for good fortune. And often they'll put it upside down, so it'll have the meaning of Fu Daola, which is a play on words in Chinese. You know, both Fu, the character Fu is upside down, but fortune was already, you know, Fu has already arrived at this house, fortune's already arrived.
Right.
So, but, and a couple other places you'll see red. A tradition that I really like is door frames will often be decorated with two red banners on either side and one over the top. And it's called duiliar in Chinese. So they're actually poetic couplets that there's kind of a tradition about how you construct it, but it also allows individual families to kind of write their own poetry about the coming new year or about their hopes and dreams for the new year. And those will be on red backgrounds as well.
That's very interesting. And I understand that red envelopes are given out as gifts. Do you know a little bit about how that tradition got started?
Yes, they're primarily given to children and the elderly. And the money in it is called yasui qian. So sui actually refers to a demon in Chinese folklore. So it's kind of like a perverse tooth fairy tradition. They believe that the demon sui would visit children in the evening and do bad things. But it was discovered that metal coins would actually scare away the demon sui. So the tradition came that giving money would bring good fortune and good health and safety to children and the elderly. So that evolved into giving money in red envelopes. So,
Wow, that's really interesting. Who knew there was the Chinese version of the Tooth Fairy?
well, it's kind of a tooth fairy horror show, so
Yeah, Tooth
visiting
Fairy
children
horror
at night.
show. Well, now, what celebration anywhere in the world would be complete without some really good food? So could you tell us a little bit about the food that is traditionally associated with Chinese New Year? I know long noodles are one, and maybe there's some others that you can think of.
Well, you know, I will preface this in saying food is one of my favorite things to talk about, but it's also a very controversial kind of subject in Chinese culture. And why I say controversial is China is a very big country, it's a very vast country. So traditions particularly related to food will be different, say, in the north of China versus the south of China. So it's kind of hard to always say what a particular menu would be. It kind of depends on where you are in China. But very important dishes. Now, dumplings are a good example of this. So dumplings are always made in the north of China generally, or a tradition in the north of China. And it really kind of ties into how the New Year is celebrated because family will gather maybe on New Year's Eve and they'll prepare dumplings. It's called baojiaozi. So, and then on New Year's Day, they'll want to celebrate, or New Year's Eve dinner and New Year's Day, they'll want to eat as many jiaozi as possible because it's believed that dumplings are very similar to how Chinese used to smelt gold and put them in ingots. So eating a lot of jiaozi, eating a lot of dumplings was equivalent to, in a way, eating a lot of money, eating a lot of gold. So having a good life for the New Year.
Sort of like how people here in the South will eat collard greens for New Year.
Exactly. Now that's the north of China, and it's fair to say that's a Chinese tradition. But my wife is from Sichuan province, which is in the southwest of China, and that's kind of like the France of China. They take their cuisine very seriously, so they never have jiaozi on New Year's Eve. Now, something that they might do is they might have sausage that they prepare days ahead of time. And my wife and I actually continue this tradition here in North Carolina. So it's something that you can make it to your taste for spicy or sweetness, and you air dry it out for several days. And having that meat as part of the New Year's tradition is something that we enjoy, her family enjoys.
So in coastal regions, are seafoods like shrimp enjoyed?
Fish is usually part of any part of China, and that's just because the character yu is another homophone in Chinese. So yu means fish, but it also means plenty or surplus. So there's a phrase in Chinese, nian nian you yu. So every year, it's not fish, but every year have more than you can handle, have more available to you, have a surplus. So it's believed that having the fish as part of your Chinese New Year's Eve feast will bring you that surplus, will bring you that extra good fortune, more than you need for the new year.
That's great. And for the long noodles, I understand that they are supposed to symbolize long life. Is that correct?
That's true. And again, speaking as someone who comes from the Sichuan province, so Sichuanese don't, usually have noodles, but in other parts of China, particularly in the northern part of China, noodles are much more part of the cuisine. And they believe having long noodles, phrasing in Chinese, it's called changshou mian, so it's kind of like long life noodles. So eating these noodles is also another way of, hoping to have a good and long and healthy and prosperous life.
You don't want to cut the noodles.
Right. You don't want to cut them off too short. But again, that's more of a northern tradition than a southern tradition. So, but it's something that is part of the New Year's celebration as well.
And so, can you talk a little bit about? We talked a little bit about the symbolism of red envelopes and of the different foods.
Mm-hmm.
Could you talk a little bit about the symbolism behind the traditions of getting a haircut or cleaning your house?
Well, let's see. Kind of going into cleaning the house. Now, a bit of the history of Chinese New Year is it really dates back about 3,500 years. And a lot of it was religious ceremonies, honoring ancestors, honoring different gods, that would take place about the end of the year. So kind of that preparation aspect of it, I think, fed into the idea of cleaning out your house, cleansing your house, getting rid of, the bad luck or, the dirt from last year, and preparing yourself for good fortune for the beginning of the year. Now, haircuts are interesting because it's something that I've heard of before, and it's almost like a superstition, I believe. I don't really know the origins of it, but there's usually the advice given in Chinese astrology not to get a haircut around New Year's time. So, and I think it might feed into some of the idea of kind of like going back to changshou mian, not wanting to cut any thread short or doing anything like that. But that's speculation. So, there's a couple other foods that are popular. We talked about dumplings in the north of China. Tangyuar, which are sweet, sticky rice balls, are made in the south of China. My mother-in-law, Sichuan is an example of that. My mother-in-law is a particular fan of that. But they represent things like unity, the way the different ways are pronounced. So the dish itself is an idea of family unity. There's also another glutinous rice treat called Myengal, which is another homophone, which can be the name of the particular food, but also means getting higher and higher every year, excelling every year. And that's usually popular. I believe Shanghai in particular, they like Myengal. But that's another glutinous rice treat that's associated with China. So kind of circling back a little bit with food, Chinese New Year evolved from a religious tradition in the Shang Dynasty to really where it is today, where it's all about families getting together to celebrate. And food is a very big part of that, of course. So there's a meal, and different families have different traditions. We talked about different regions, like different cuisines, like different dishes.
Because there's quite a bit of cultural diversity just within China itself.
Right. And even the families themselves, like, some families will want to have 8 dishes, because 8 is a lucky number in Chinese. In fact, usually when you give a red envelope, you try to do an amount that's the number 8 in it. But my family likes to have 12 dishes, so, the 12 zodiac animals are represented in our New Year's Eve feast. So, it's something that it's celebrated throughout the country, it's celebrated throughout the world, but also families individually in different regions put their own little spin on it as well.
And, there's a lot of holidays that can be set up, like Christmas and,
And this is the most important in Chinese culture.
So moving on, you mentioned that this upcoming year is the year of the tiger.
Yes.
So do you know a little bit about the Chinese zodiac and how it got started?
Well, the zodiac, I believe, has about a 2,000 plus year history, and it's related to, if you look at astronomy and astrology in the West, it has to do with the Chinese conceptions of constellations. So these animals were associated with constellations in the Chinese astronomical tradition, or astrological tradition, excuse me, I got the word wrong. So, but the folklore behind them is the different animals represent different characteristics. You can see there are 12 of them. I referred also back to the 5 elements in Chinese culture. So actually every 12-year cycle is related to a different element. So it's a 60-year cycle in total. So this is not just the year of the tiger that's coming up, it's the year of the water tiger. And 2010 was the year of the metal tiger, if I recall correctly. So, and why are they in this particular order? How are they associated with these particular years? I don't know the historical background about that, but there are a lot of legends associated with this.
Yes, I understand that there was a legend that there was an ancient emperor called the Jade Emperor.
Yes.
Who told all the animals they could run a race, and that the first 12 animals to cross the finish line would get a place in the calendar. Have you heard that legend?
I've heard that legend told different times. I think part of the race involved crossing a river was an element of it, if I recall correctly. And it was all a race to be part of the Jade Emperor's Imperial Guard. You'll notice that the rat came in first. It's because it's believed he cheated. The Jade Emperor was hoping the ox would come in first, but the rat kind of stowed away on the ox's back and then jumped ahead towards the finish line. And the animal of my particular year of birth, the pig, came in last.
Yes, mine, I believe, is the rabbit.
Mm-hmm.
My year of birth is the rabbit, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And so another animal listed here, which it's not the year of this year, but
Mm-hmm.
it's the dragon.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand, even though both Western culture and Eastern culture, this mythological creature exists within both cultures,
Mm-hmm.
folklore, but it's viewed very differently in the East as opposed to the West. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. Well, in the West, of course, the dragon is a fire-breathing monster that, depending on if you're a fan of J.R.R. Tolkien, maybe it's hoarding gold or slaying villages, what have you. But in the East, it's very different, particularly in China. The dragon is a mythical creature, of course, but it's associated with the emperor. And many emperors claim to be descendants of the dragon. In fact, Chinese people at one point in their history could refer to themselves as Longren, people of the dragon, through the emperor. So the dragon still symbolizes power in Chinese culture and Eastern culture, but it's not an evil creature. It's a creature that provides really guidance. Creature that's associated with the imperial dynasties, so it's a creature that's respected. That's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah, it's a much more positive view.
Yes,
in
and
Eastern culture as opposed to Western culture.
exactly. And part of New Year celebrations can involve dragon dancing, where there's a very large costume and there are people underneath moving around like a dragon. So really, people are looking for the dragon to be part of their lives in Chinese culture and Eastern culture, whereas in the West we want people to slay them.
Right. And we've got some dragons here,
Mm-hmm.
and we've got another kind of fireworks.
Mm-hmm.
And fireworks, I believe, originated in China. Is that correct?
They did. I believe it was the Tang Dynasty, which is, I'd have to check my dates, but probably about 300 to 600 AD. Gunpowder was invented, and gunpowder was actually invented with the pursuit of trying to find an elixir for long life. But ironically, they came up with something different.
Yeah.
So, going back to some of the folklore with New Year, there was another tradition that at the end of the year, there was a creature called Nian, which actually sounds like the Chinese word for year. And he would terrorize the village, eating the livestock, doing all those sorts of horrible things. So one old man in the village discovered that, the villagers decided to hide away from Yen when the creature was about to come. But one old man discovered there were a couple things that scared the creature in the end, and they were the color red, but also burning bamboo, which had kind of a crackly sensation very similar to fireworks. So part of the reason people do fireworks in China around the time of the New Year is based on this kind of folklore, based on this tradition. So when fireworks were actually invented, when gunpowder I should say was invented, it was actually placed in bamboo. And so bamboo was filled with gunpowder, and then it was put in fire, and then it exploded that way. But then eventually, Chinese were able to do fireworks wrapped in paper tubes, and those paper tubes were often red. So people on New Year's Eve would light fireworks around midnight when New Year's came. There'd be areas where you'd see the red paper scattered all over where people had been doing fireworks, but people wouldn't want to sweep away the paper on New Year's Day because they'd feel like that was good fortune, and they didn't want to sweep away any good fortune or good luck. So yes, fireworks originated with the invention of gunpowder in China, but they kind of folded themselves in the New Year's tradition to both, scare away mythical creatures, but also to bring good fortune.
All right, and we have another picture. We had talked about the New Year's celebration in San Francisco, so there's a picture of that.
Mm-hmm.
If anybody's wondering, these are the citations for the pictures I used in the slideshow that gave us some visual aids. And thank you to my coworker Sarah Wall for putting together these red envelopes and these Chinese lanterns. And if you'd like to make your own, it is our craft for this month. So come in and get a craft kit. Well, that is History Club for this month. Thank you so much to our special guest, Tom Martineau, for coming by. And thank you all for watching. And if you're celebrating Chinese New Year, have a happy New Year and celebration. And we will see you next month.
新年快乐！